The name of this presentation is Reversing the Thermoeconomic Arrow of Time, and is subtitled The Returns to the Factors of Production Analyzed for Efficiency through a Thermodynamic Engine. For the sake of this presentation, based on a paper of the same name, it is abridged. My name is William Schnack, and you can find me at my website, ambiarchy.com, or you can email me at will@evolutionofconsent.com. Next. Thermoeconomics is the combination of the fields of thermodynamics and economics. Thermodynamics is the study of heat and heat transfer. Economics is the study of resources and resource transfer. Next. Thermoeconomics was pioneered by thinkers such as Nicholas Georgescu Roegen in his The Entropy Law and the Economic Process, and John Bryant in his Thermoeconomics, a thermodynamic approach to economics. Next. Most approaches to thermoeconomics are based upon contemporary approaches to thermodynamics and economics. They accept the primacy of the second law of thermodynamics, the entropy law, and they accept the outcome of the marginal revolution, marginal utility, in economics. Next. Stated briefly, these are the second law of thermodynamics, or the entropy law. Entropy is always increasing. And the marginal revolution, or marginal utility, value is derived from the subjective satisfaction, or utility, of consuming an additional product or resource. Next. While I accept the entropy law and marginal utility on their own, I reject the primacy of them both. There is a law complementary to entropy, called syntropy, that is not properly accounted for in standard models of thermodynamics. Marginal utility is not a negation of the labor theory of value, centered on economic or exchange value, but is a method for measuring labor's use value, that is, how much use can be gained from that labor. Next. Instead of being mechanical or physical, like entropy, syntropy contributes to organic or living processes. Because economy, or human action, is the lifeblood of society, and society is emerging as a biological superorganism, economy can be considered an organic, rather than purely mechanical, process. Next. Instead of being purely subjective, like marginal utility, the labor theory of value considers the objective reasons for economic or exchange value. The labor theory of value had already maintained a subjective or utility component to it, but maintained that the objective source of value was labor. Maneuvers to dissuade the public from the labor theory of value by contrasting it to new insights from marginal utility were largely disingenuous or confused. Next. So I decide to make a model of a thermoeconomic engine that features the insights of classical economics and syntropic thermodynamics. Because it looks back to the basics in economics and looks forward to the innovations in thermodynamics, it has both classical and novel elements. This sort of mixture of old and new elements is sometimes referred to as retro-progressive. Next. This next section is called the Thermoeconomic Engine. Next. In a basic thermodynamic engine, one has a heat reservoir, an engine, and an output basin. Heat enters the engine from the hot reservoir. The engine runs and places remaining heat into the output basin. However, there is also a cold reservoir. Cold waste enters into the cold reservoir. Next. The heat reservoir contains energy, which, after being put through the engine, puts out exergy. Exergy is energy or work that can be used in another process. The cold reservoir contains the entropy derived from accessing the exergy. This is much like if one were to use flour and water in their home kitchen to make bread, which always leaves some dough stuck on the bowl and spoon, crumbs after it is baked, it makes the kitchen a little hotter. Next, the economic production process can be spoken of in the same way. The factors of production are put through the engine of production in order to produce needed products. Needed products are those products that one is willing to do economically demanded work for. However, surplus products are also produced. These are products that one controls but did not earn. Let's take a closer look. Next. The factors of production are land, labor, and capital. These are used in the economy to produce and distribute wages. Wages are the economic return to the one doing the labor. But rent, profit, and interest are also produced and exchanged in the economy. The return to land is rent. The return to the controller of another's labor is profit. And the return to capital is interest. Next. This section is called labor and cost. Next. Labor, or cost, is anything that is negatively experienced by the worker in the production process, including loss of time, boredom, exhaustion, danger, attentiveness, or etc. Under voluntary conditions, a worker's costs are compensated by natural wages. The natural wage is the wage needed to compensate the worker to do the work completely voluntarily, without duress. But under involuntary conditions, they are not fully compensated, and what compensation they have doesn't go far. Agreements with employers do not provide contract wages that cover the full natural wage of the worker. The worker is also gouged by rent and interest. Next. When workers voluntarily exchange wages for wages in the market, they exchange at cost. They benefit not by profiting from, renting to, or indebting one another, but by increasing the quality and quantity of their products due to specializing and sharing in variety together by making exchanges. Landlords, rentiers, bosses or speculators, and lenders or usurers do not face a cost when they lose their rent, profit, or interest, even in exchange. They only face a loss. A cost is something that labor feels. For another instance, take the person who accepts a gift. If they lose that gift, it didn't cost them anything. It only cost the person who gave it. The same is true of rent, profit, and interest. When it is lost or exchanged, there is no cost. Next. Of course, it must be remembered that people act in different capacities. To the degree that a landlord does handiwork, that a boss manages business, or that a lender is also a clerk, is the degree to which they act in the capacity of a worker, which deserves wages commensurate with the natural value of the work they do. This is separate from their capacity as a rentier, speculator, or usurer, in which they derive an idle income, called rent, profit, or interest. Next. When a person faces a cost for something, they are more likely to take care not to lose it than if it had cost them nothing. They need the thing, sacrificed for it, and so value it. Because rent, interest, and profit are not felt as costs by the owner, they are often mismanaged or wasted. This leads to increased environmental or thermoecological damage. Next. Duress and aggression, the source of exploitation. Next. Duress is ultimately derived from threats of violence, but often comes in the form of not having a place to live, or a place to work, or a bicycle to ride. Slaves face direct threats of violence, but workers, in their capacity as employees, tenants, or debtors, face indirect threats of violence, such as joblessness, or homelessness, or transportationlessness, before being threatened directly with force if they resist. Under conditions of threatened joblessness and homelessness, employment, rental, and borrower contracts must be treated as if they were accepted under duress, and cannot be considered fully voluntary. Next. Under duress, workers accept contract wages that are below their natural compensation in order to access the land, licensing, or capital that they need to exist. To access land, licensing, or capital, workers pay rent, profit, or interest to their landlord, boss, or lender. They accept these terms of paying a portion of their natural wages as rent, profit, or interest to another for the bare necessities of life because they do not have access to land, licensing, or capital of their own, due primarily to monopolization of real estate, licensure, and financial and industrial access by business and government. Next. As can be seen, there is a relationship between acts of aggression such as theft, fraud, extortion, vandalism, and initiating violence, and acts of exploitation such as the taking of rent, interest, profit, or causing distortion to wages through structural adjustments. When land and capital are monopolized, they provide the monopolist with rent and interest. Similarly, when licensing is monopolized, it drives a profit. Exploitation stems from and is upheld by threats of aggression. Next, economic value is derived from labor, but the owners of unequal land and capital can derive returns purely by virtue of their monopolizing land and capital, thereby robbing labor of its reward. The mechanisms by which land and capital are monopolized are A. the private ownership, as opposed to personal stewardship, of land, and B. the regulation of the creation of money by interests outside of the users of that money, which keeps capital from flowing into hands that need it. Next. Okay, so back to the thermoeconomic engine. Next. So work is put into the economy in order to sustain workers. We now see that the factors of production represent work. This work enters into the economy, the production and distribution process, and produces wages for workers. But rentiers, speculators, and usurers also get a portion of the product of labor because they hold title to the means to produce. And so there is also rent for rentiers, profit for speculators, and interest for usurers. Next. The factors of production are used in the economy to produce wages. The economy is often measured in terms of the gross domestic product, or GDP, however. Rent, interest, profit, and structural adjustments are also claimed out of the product of labor. And so the GDP is represented in terms of RIPSA, or aggregated rent, interest, profit, structural adjustments, and wages. And please note, structural adjustments are not a return to a factor of production, but represent distortions to those returns. Next. The efficiency of our engine can be measured by the following equation. Next. GDP equals RIPSAW, or RIPSA. RIPSA equals RIPSA plus W. Efficiency equals E1 over Q1 by 100%. Next. Increasing efficiency by decreasing entropy. Next. We can use the wages that we consume to fuel the mental and manual labor needed to innovate our management of the factors of production, and thereby decrease entropy and increase exergy. The reduction of entropy is called negentropy. Next. Much entropy can be reduced by innovating the manner in which the factors of production resonate. When entropy is reduced, much more extropy can be put toward wages as exergy, and prices to consumers, tenants, licensees, and debtors can be reduced. Next. Conserving energy by allowing syntropy. Next. While mechanistic processes may only increase the entropy over time, organic processes may reverse entropy, which in turn increases exergy stores. This reversal of entropy is called syntropy. Syntropy can be utilized in the economy because the economy is the lifeblood of society, which is an emerging superorganism that we take part in constructing, like our cells take part in constructing us, multicellular creatures. The economy is an organic process, not a purely mechanical one. We can construct our society into a strong organism by recapturing the surplus returns of rent, profit, and interest into the needed return of wages to fuel more innovation and more life. Next. Much entropy can be reduced by innovating the manner in which the factors of production resonate. But prior entropy can be syntropically reversed by giving rent, profit, and interest back to their rightful holders as economic wages, likely in the form of dividends paid to the worker in their varying capacities. Next. Thank you for your attention. I am William Schnack. You can find more from me at my website, ambiarchy.com, or you are welcome to email me.